She was the one person in the world he was born to find, and she was the only one he could not see. Born without a scent, she was a ghost among her own kind. Wolves walked past her, their eyes sliding over her as if she were empty air. For the Alpha King, a tracker who could follow a single thread of fragrance across continents, it was a special kind of madness. He could feel the mate bond pulling at his soul, a golden tether screaming she was right beside him. Yet every time he turned, he found nothing but empty space. In a world where wolves navigate by scent as much as sight, her condition was a unique curse. She wasn't just ignored, she was neurologically absent from their perception. For the king, this created an impossible puzzle. His every instinct told him his other half was mere feet away, a constant, maddening whisper in his blood. But how do you find someone who, to all your senses, does not exist? The truth would unravel a bond hidden in plain sight. Her name was Ilara, and from her first breath, she was a blank space in a world of overwhelming sensation. In the Willow Creek pack, where every emotion had a smell, fear like burnt copper, joy like sun-warmed honey, Ilara emitted nothing, not the faintest whisper of vanilla or rain. As a pup, her own mother would turn her back, forgetting she was in the room. She wasn't shunned, she was simply missed. The pack's neurologist called it a rare synaptic disconnect, her brain failing to produce the pheromonal signature that marked a wolf as a living, feeling being. To them, she was static, background noise, furniture. She adapted by becoming indispensable in the quietest ways. While other Omegas served food, Ilara managed the entire pack, digital infrastructure from a dusty back office. She balanced ledgers, encrypted communications, and maintained the security systems. Her work was flawless, anonymous, and utterly taken for granted. No one ever asked who fixed the firewall, they just assumed it worked. Her only friend was Leo, a half-deaf agging beta whose diminished senses allowed him to perceive her shape, if not her scent. "You're a ghost with a login," he'd chuckle, bringing her tea, the most powerful kind. 100 miles north, in the granite fortress of the High Peak territory, Alpha King Kashan was coming apart. He was a legend, a sovereign who had unified 5 warring regions by 25. His tracking ability was mythic. He could find a single drop of blood in a river, but for 3 months, a phantom ache had settled in his chest, a relentless pulling tension behind his sternum, the mate bond. It was active, burning, screaming that his other half was near. Yet every time he followed the pull, it led him in frantic, maddening circles within his own capital city. He'd stalk the streets until dawn, his wolf frantic, only to end up back at the gates of his own fortress. His advisors whispered he was being cursed. His enemies speculated he was going rogue. The truth was simpler and more devastating. His mate's signal had no origin point. The annual Interpack Conclave was the solution, or so Kashan's council hoped. Gather every wolf from the allied territories in one place. Let the king walk among them. The bond would surely lead him straight to her. The conclave was held at the neutral Grand Lodge, a sprawling complex in the mountains between their lands. Hundreds arrived. Ilara came as part of Willow Creek's support staff, tasked with managing the conference's network security from a server room in the basement. For her, it was another windowless room. For Kashan, it was a fresh layer of hell. The moment his motorcade passed through the lodge gates, the bond screamed. She was here, right here. He erupted from his car, his amber eyes wild, nostrils flaring as he inhaled 1,000 competing scents, pine, anxiety, ambition, perfume. But beneath it all nothing, no unique signature calling to him. He paced the grand hall like a caged animal, the invisible tether in his chest yanking him toward the eastern wall. He shoved past dignitaries, following the pull down a service corridor, which ended at a blank wall and a janitor's closet. He slammed his fist into the stone, cracking it. She was torturing him. Ilara felt it too, but she had no name for the sensation. A strange, warm pressure had built in her chest since arriving, a feeling of being tethered to a distant star. She dismissed it as stress. From her basement cave, she monitored security feeds. She watched the famous, furious Alpha King on her screens, his frustration palpable even through pixels. She felt a pang of sympathy. He looked haunted. Unknowingly, she zoomed the camera in on his face, studying the tension in his jaw. At that exact moment, on the feed, Kashan's head snapped up. He stared directly into the security camera as if he could feel her gaze. Ilara's breath hitched. It was coincidence. It had to be. That night, the opening banquet was a spectacle. Ilara, as usual, was not seated. She was troubleshooting a bandwidth issue in the main hall's control booth, hidden behind a one-way mirror above the dancing crowd. Below, Cashin sat at the high table, a king surrounded by sycophants, radiating barely contained fury. The bond was a live wire, buzzing, pulling him toward the ceiling. He glared at the ornate rafters, his knuckles white around his goblet. Then, during a toast, a drunken beater from a rival pack stumbled, sending a tray of crystal glasses shattering across the floor. The sharp, sudden noise was a trigger. In the control booth, Ilara, startled, dropped her tablet. It wasn't the crash that frightened her. It was the instantaneous, volcanic roar of pure rage that answered it from the hall below. Cashin had erupted. The bond, stretched taut by his frustration, had briefly mirrored her spike of fear, a feeling that for the first time had a location, not a scent, but an emotional echo that rang from a point above him. His control shattered. He overturned his table, his wolf surging to the surface, his eyes blazing gold as he roared at the entire assembly. "Where is she?" The room froze. "My mate is here, in this room. Who is hiding her from me?" Silence, then hesitant whispers. No one knew. No new scent had entered the hall. They thought he'd lost his mind. Hidden behind the mirror, Ilara watched the terrifying king, her heart hammering against that strange, warm tether in her chest. His words echoed in her soul. "My mate is here." The warm pressure surged, becoming a painful, beautiful pull directly toward the man raging below. An impossible, terrifying understanding dawned. The phantom feeling the king's madness, they were connected to her. As Cashin's enforcers moved to calm him, his gaze, desperate and searching, swept the room one last time and landed on the one-way mirror of the control booth. He couldn't see her, but he stopped. He stared. The bond hummed, a straight, true line between his heart and the darkened glass. He took a step toward it. In the booth, Ilara's screen flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. The door handle to the booth, down the hall and around a corner, began to rattle, not from a person trying to get in, from the sheer, vibrating pressure of the Alpha King's approaching power. The door didn't open, it ceased to exist. One second it was a solid barrier of steel and oak. The next, it was splinters and twisted metal hanging from the frame. Alpha King Cashin filled the doorway, his massive frame outlined by the emergency lights of the corridor. His chest heaved, his amber eyes molten with a mixture of rage and desperate hope. He inhaled deeply, searching the dark booth. Nothing, no scent. Yet the bond was a physical cord in his chest, pulling him directly toward the shadowy corner where a server rack hummed. Ilara pressed herself against the cold metal of the rack, invisible in the dark. She held her breath, a useless instinct for a creature who couldn't be smelled. She watched the king's eyes scan the room, passing over her twice. He saw the chairs, the monitors, the wires. He did not see asterisk her asterisk. A low, agonized growl rumbled from his throat. "I can feel you," he whispered, the sound raw. "Why can't I find you?" He took a step inside, then another. He was close enough now that Ilara could see the faint tremble in his hands. The terrifying, legendary king was trembling. The warm tether in her own chest flared, a surge of answering ache so powerful it broke her paralysis. She let out a small, involuntary gasp. Cashin froze, his head snapped toward the sound. His eyes narrowed, focusing not on her, but on the empty space she occupied. He stared at that patch of darkness, and slowly his expression shifted from frustration to dawning, earth-shattering comprehension. He wasn't looking for a scent. He was looking for a distortion, a void in the world where his senses told him something living asterisk should asterisk be. There, he breathed. He didn't reach for where she was. He reached for where she was. His large, calloused hand moved through the air until his fingertips were an inch from her cheek. The bond between them detonated. It was no longer a pull. It was a complete, instantaneous fusion, a silent snap that echoed in their souls. Ilara's vision whited out. For the first time in her life, she was asterisk perceived asterisk, not as a shape, but as an essence. She felt his recognition like a key turning in a lock she never knew she had. A wave of scent, not from her, but from him, washed over her, ancient cedar, cold granite, and the electric crackle of a coming storm. It was the smell of home she'd never had. Cashin's eyes widened, the gold in them blazing. He didn't need a scent. The bond was confirmation enough. "You," he said, the word a reverent shock. "It's you." He closed the final inch, his palm cupping her cheek. The contact was a jolt of pure, undiluted energy. Ilara's knees buckled. Cashin caught her, pulling her against him. For a long moment he just held her, his face buried in her hair, inhaling desperately even though he smelled nothing but shampoo. "You're real," he murmured against her temple, his voice breaking. "By the moon, you're real." The moment was shattered by pounding footsteps. Cashin's head beater, Torin, and two enforcers skidded to a halt in the ruined doorway, weapons drawn. "My king," we heard. They stopped. They saw their king holding empty air. To their senses, Cashin was embracing nothingness, his expression one of rapturous relief. Torin's face paled. "Cashin, what are you doing?" Cashin didn't let go. He turned his head, his gaze becoming predatory, protective. "She is here, Torin, my mate." Torin exchanged a horrified glance with the enforcers. This was worse than they thought. The bond had broken his mind. "Cashin, there's no one there. You're holding nothing." Ilara flinched. The familiar sting of invisibility now magnified 1,000-fold in the face of this miracle. Cashin felt it. His arms tightened around her. "Your eyes are lying to you," he growled at his beater. "She is right here. She has no scent. She's been invisible to us all." Understanding, cold and slow, dawned on Torin's face. The myth of the scentless wolf, a fairy tale used to scare pups, but the absolute, unwavering certainty in his alpha's eyes was not madness, it was truth. News traveled through the Grand Lodge like wildfire. The Alpha King had found his mate, and she was a ghost. By the time Cashin led Ilara, her hand firmly clasped in his, out of the basement and into the main hall, a crowd had gathered. Wolves from a dozen packs lined the grand staircase, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and thinly veiled suspicion. They saw their king. They saw his hand held out as if leading someone. They saw nothing. Murmurs spread. "He's lost it. The pressure finally broke him. He's conjured a phantom." Ilara's own alpha from Willow Creek, a shrewd man named Gorvan, pushed to the front, his expression calculating. "King Cashin," he said, his voice oily with false concern. "We are delighted for you, but perhaps the strain of the search has, well, where is this mate of yours? Let us welcome her properly." Cashin's smile was all teeth. "You're looking right at her, Gorvan. Ilara is a member of your own pack, your systems administrator." A ripple of disbelief. Gorvan blinked. "Ilara, the quiet girl in the office?" He peered at the empty space beside Cashin, his nose wrinkling as he tried and failed to catch a scent. A slow, condescending smirk spread across his face. "My king, with respect, Ilara is a simple Omega, a useful worker, yes, but mate to a king, and if she were here, we would send her. This is clearly a tragic misunderstanding." The dismissal in his voice was the final straw. Ilara, who had spent a lifetime swallowing her voice, felt something new rise within her, a fierce, protective fury not for herself, but for the bond she now held, for the man being called a lunatic because of her. She squeezed Cashin's hand and stepped forward, releasing his grip. The crowd watched, baffled, as Cashin's empty hand dropped to his side. Then, a chair at a nearby banquet table slid out with a screech. Ilara sat down in it. Every eye tracked the movement of the chair, not the person in it. "This is a parlor trick," Gorvan scoffed, but uncertainty edged his voice. From the center of the table, a silver fruit knife lifted into the air. It floated, point first, until it was level with Gorvan's throat. Ilara's voice, clear and steady, emanated from the empty chair. "I can balance your pack's budget, Alpha Gorvan. I can bypass your encrypted files. I can make your entire security grid vanish with 3 keystrokes." The knife twisted slowly. "Do not call my mate's sanity into question again." The hall was utterly silent. This was no phantom. This was a presence, a powerful, intelligent, and now visibly angry one. Cashin's roar of laughter broke the tension. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. He walked over and placed his hand on the empty space above the chair's back, his expression blazing with pride. "She speaks." The revelation rewrote the rules. A scentless mate was not a curse, it was a tactical anomaly. In the war room of Cashin's suite, his inner circle gathered. Torin, his head of security, Riven, and the ancient pack historian, Lyra. Ilara sat beside Cashin, a cup of tea visible in midair as she held it. Lyra unrolled a brittle scroll. "The condition is called the Veil. It's not a disconnect, but an overload. The brain produces the pheromonal signature, but at a frequency so high it becomes ultrasonic to our senses. Invisible. It's a dormant genetic trait thought extinct. It didn't hide her from her mate, it hid her from everyone else. The old woman looked at Elara with awe. In ancient times, such wolves were not omegas, they were royal shadows, assassins, spies. The ultimate keepers of secrets. The pivot was staggering. Elara wasn't broken. She was a relic of a lost, powerful lineage. Her invisibility wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon her pack had been too blind to see. But the political fallout was immediate. Gorvan, realizing the asset he had unknowingly housed and lost, was furious. Other alphas saw a scentless queen as an abomination, a crack in the natural order. Whispers of illegitimate bond began. The greatest threat, however, came from Kashin's most powerful rival, Alpha Kale of the Blackwood Fen territory. A traditionalist who believed power was tied to bloodline and scent, Kale saw Kashin's mate as the perfect pretext for a challenge. The challenge arrived at dawn, delivered by a stern-faced envy. A formal petition to the Interpack Council, citing an ancient law, a bond unrecognizable by scent could be declared void if challenged by 3 ruling alphas. Kale had already secured 2 signatures. He needed 1 more. The hearing was set for 3 days' time. If the council voted against them, the bond would be severed by law, Kashin would be weakened, and Elara would be cast out as an unmated aberration. Kashin wanted to go to war. Elara saw the trap. "They want you to react with force," she said, her form a faint shimmer in the morning light as she stood before a map of the territories. "It proves you're unstable, mated to a phantom. This is a boardroom war, Kashin, and they think I'm unarmed." She had a plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and relied entirely on her unique condition. To prove their bond was valid, they wouldn't appeal to tradition. They would dismantle it. Elara would infiltrate the conclave of opposing alphas not as a queen, but as the ghost she had always been. She would become the ultimate spy in the house of her enemies. On the eve of the hearing, Elara stood in the armory. Riven, the security chief, handed her not a weapon, but a tiny, nearly undetectable fiber-optic camera and a subcutaneous audio transmitter. "The feed will be live to the king's private server. No one will see you, but for Moon's sake, don't get caught. If they physically touch you, the jig is up." Kashin gripped her shoulders, his expression torn between pride and terror. "I should be the one going." "You're the one they'll be watching," Elara said, pressing her forehead to his. "The invisible girl goes unseen. It's what I do." She slipped out of the fortress using a service tunnel known only to her from the lodge blueprints. Her target was the private dining chamber where Kale was hosting a secret dinner to secure the 3rd and final vote from the wavering alpha of the Silver Peaks. The plan was simple: get in, get evidence of coercion or conspiracy, get out. But as Elara ghosted past guards and through a ventilation grate into the chamber's ceiling crawlspace, she heard something that turned her blood to ice. It wasn't just about voiding the bond. Kale's voice, cold and sure, filtered up through the grate. "Once the council severs his tether to that nothing, Kashin will be emotionally crippled. His judgment will be compromised. That's when we move. My forces are already massing at the northern pass. We don't just take his mate, we take his throne." This wasn't a political challenge. It was a prelude to a coup. And Elara, the invisible queen, was the only one who knew. She adjusted the camera, her hands steady. The evidence was here. But as she leaned closer, the old wooden beam beneath her knee let out a sharp, unmistakable crack. In the dead silence below, the cracking wood echoed like a gunshot. Alpha Kale's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto the ceiling grate. What was that? One of his enforcers was already moving, drawing a silver-bladed dagger. Elara stopped breathing, pressing herself flat against the dusty beams. The enforcer's hand reached for the grate. Then, from the corner of the dining chamber, a champagne bottle, jostled by a passing server, toppled from a sideboard and shattered on the floor. The sudden noise redirected every gaze. Kale cursed, waving a hand. "Clumsy fool, check the ceiling anyway." It was the delay Elara needed. She slithered backward through the crawlspace, moving with a speed born of pure adrenaline. By the time the enforcer shoved the grate open and shone a light into the darkness, she was gone, the only evidence a faint scuff mark in the dust and a single, dormant air vent leading into the lodge's old chimney flue. She emerged, covered in soot, in an unused fireplace in the east wing. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but the tiny data drive in her palm was secure. She had it all: Cale's admission of the plot, the names of his allies, the location of the massing forces at the northern pass. She ran. Back in Cashin's war room, the mood shifted from anxiety to grim determination as the footage played. Torin, Riven, and the others watched, their faces hardening. This was no longer about a mate bond. This was treason and impending war. Cashin's expression was carved from stone. He moves at dawn after the council vote, expecting me to be broken. We move tonight. But Ilara, replaying the audio, held up a hand. Wait, listen again. She amplified a section. Beneath Cale's voice, another, fainter sound, the rhythmic tapping of fingers in a specific pattern. A code. She isolated it and ran it through a decryption algorithm she'd built from PAC security protocols. The result made her blood run cold. The code wasn't just about troop movements. It was an activation signal for sleeper agents already inside Cashin's territory. Cale's coup wasn't an external invasion. It was an inside job. The revelation rewrote the entire battlefield. They couldn't just fortify the border, they had to find the traitors within their own walls. And they had less than 12 hours until the council hearing, which Cale would use as a distraction. The "it gets worse" moment came from the historian Lyra. As they scrambled to identify the code's recipients, she entered, her face ashen, carrying an even older, darker leather-bound tome. "The veil," she said, her voice trembling. "I researched further. It is not just a genetic trait. It is a magical one tied to the lunar goddess's shadow aspect. A scentless wolf is not just invisible to us. In times of great conflict, she becomes a conduit. Her bond is a stabilizing force, but if severed by force, the texts say it could unravel the territorial wards that keep the rogue supernatural elements at bay. The council doesn't just risk a war. They risk unleashing chaos that hasn't been seen in 5 centuries. The stakes were no longer personal or even political. They were apocalyptic. Cale, in his blind ambition, was playing with existential fire. Cashin made a decision. The hearing would go forward, but not as a defense. It would be an ambush. Ilara would attend, visible for the first time, not as a ghost, but as a queen. They would use the council's own stage to expose the coup and reveal the greater danger. The grand conclave hall was packed at dawn. The air was thick with tension and 1,000 clashing scents. The council of 7 head alphas sat on a raised dais. Cale, smug and confident, stood at his podium. Gorvan of Willow Creek was there, looking nervous. The third signatory, Alpha Selene of the Silver Peaks, sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Cashin entered with his retinue, and beside him, for the first time, Ilara walked visibly. She wore a simple grey gown, but her posture was regal. A collective gasp rippled through the room. They couldn't scent her, but they could see her. A living, breathing void in their sensory world. Whispers of illusion and trick spread. Cale was the first to speak, his voice dripping with scorn. "You bring a phantom before the council and expect us to believe she is real. Where is her scent? Where is her mark upon the world? This is a desperate pantomime, Cashin." Cashin ignored him, addressing the council. "You are gathered to judge the validity of a bond you cannot perceive, but you are being manipulated. The challenge is a fraud designed to weaken our territories for a coup." Cale laughed. "Lies, you fear the judgment of tradition." Then Ilara stepped forward. She did not speak. She simply raised a small remote and pressed a button. The massive screens around the hall flickered to life, playing the crystal-clear footage from the crawl space. Cale's own voice filled the hall, outlining his plans for invasion, his disdain for the council, his conspiracy. The room erupted. Cale's face purpled with rage. Forgery, sorcery. But the evidence was damning. Alpha Selene stood, her eyes cold. "I heard no coercion in that footage, Cale, only your ambition. I withdraw my signature from the petition." The third vote was gone. The bond challenge collapsed then and there. Cashin pressed the advantage. "By the laws of this council, Cale Blackwood stands accused of treason and conspiracy against the sovereign territories. Seize him." Cale's enforcers moved, but so did others, guards from neutral packs, their eyes glazing over as a hidden subsonic command triggered in their minds. The sleeper agents, chaos erupted. Fights broke out across the hall. Kale, shifting partially, roared, "The throne is mine, now." It was the signal. From outside, the sound of explosions rocked the lodge. Kale's forces had attacked early. The coup was underway. Cashin shifted in a blur of motion, placing himself between Ilara and the advancing traitors. "Torin, get her to the safe room," but Ilara shook her head, her eyes scanning the chaos. She saw patterns in the panic, gaps in the security. The bond between her and Cashin hummed, not with fear, but with a terrifying synergy. He could fight. She could see. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the din. She grabbed a tablet from a fallen clerk and her fingers flew across the screen, hacking into the lodge's central system. "I'm ending this." She triggered the lockdown protocol, but not for the whole building, only for the sectors where Kale's sleeper agents were concentrated. Heavy security doors slammed down, trapping squads of traitors in hallways and antechambers, cutting the attacking force into disconnected, manageable pieces. On the dais, Kale saw his plan disintegrating. With a snarl of pure hatred, he vaulted over the fighting masses, not toward Cashin, but directly toward Ilara. He couldn't scent her, but he could see the tablet in her hands, the focus on her face. She was the architect of his defeat. Cashin moved to intercept, but was blocked by two berserking traitors. Kale closed in, his claws extended, aimed at Ilara's heart. She looked up, meeting his eyes. She didn't flinch. She dropped the tablet and did something entirely unexpected. She stepped toward him. As Kale swung, she ducked under his arm, not away, but into his blind spot. He was a creature of scent and sound. She was a ghost of neither. Confused, he spun, but she was already behind him, having palmed the silver fruit knife from a council member's abandoned place setting. She didn't stab him. She dragged the flat of the blade along the back of his neck, disrupting the neural implant that the forensic scan of his code had indicated was there, the device used to control the sleepers. Kale screamed, collapsing as the feedback fried the implant. Across the hall, the sleeper agents stumbled, disoriented, their programming broken. Cashin dispatched his opponents and was at her side in an instant, pulling her away from the writhing Kale. The tide of the battle turned. With their leader disabled and their hidden advantage nullified, Kale's forces surrendered or were subdued. In the aftermath, standing amidst the wreckage of the hall, Cashin held Ilara, his hands checking for injuries. "You could have been killed," he breathed. "He was looking for a fighter," Ilara said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm a systems analyst. I found the glitch and patched it." The council, shaken but intact, gathered. The evidence was irrefutable. Kale was stripped of his title and taken into custody. His territories were placed under Cashin's provisional control. The bond was not just validated, it was celebrated as the union that had exposed and thwarted a great evil. But as the council prepared to adjourn, the ancient historian Lyra approached the dais, her expression still grave. She addressed the room. "The immediate threat is gone, but the greater danger remains. The bond was challenged and dark forces were stirred. The territorial wards are destabilizing. The veil on our queen is not just hiding her, it is now a pressure valve, and it is straining." She opened the ancient tome to a glowing, magical illustration. It showed a scentless wolf at the center of a web of light, holding the threads together. The bond must be consecrated in the old way, at the heart of all territories, under the full moon, not just as a mating, but as a coronation, a sealing. If not, the veil she wears will tear, and the things that wait in the shadows will come through. The victory was hollow. They had won the battle, but the war for stability was just beginning. Cashin looked at Ilara, then at the council. Where and when? Lyra's answer was a single word that carried the weight of centuries. The eclipse, in 7 days, at the crossroads of the Howling Peaks, where the first kings were crowned and where the last great war began. The 7 days until the eclipse were a countdown written in anxiety. The crossroads of the Howling Peaks was not a place one simply visited. It was a nexus of raw, untamed magic, a valley where the borders between territories thinned to nothing. The journey itself was a trial, a 3-day trek through shifting forests and over mountains that seemed to rearrange themselves in the mist. Cashin's force was a mix of his most trusted warriors and the few council alphas brave enough to witness the old magic. Ilara walked among them, a silent figure in a hooded cloak, feeling the weight of the wards like a thinning drumskin beneath her feet. The instability Lyra warned of manifested in subtle, terrifying ways. On the second night, the northern lights, usually a distant spectacle, bled down to the treetops, casting eerie green shadows that whispered. Wolves with them reported hearing voices in the wind, voices of long-dead ancestors, voices of things that had never been alive. The fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. They arrived at the crossroads under a bruised twilight sky. The valley was a perfect, unnatural circle of bare stone, ringed by jagged peaks that looked like broken teeth. At its center stood a dais of black obsidian, etched with runes that glowed with a faint, milky light. There were no buildings, no altars, just the stone, the sky, and the pressing silence of ancient power. Lyra, who had made the journey despite her age, moved to the dais with a vial of mixed blood, a drop from each of the 7 territories. The consecration is not a wedding, she explained, her voice barely a whisper in the vast space. It is a binding. You will tie your souls to the land itself. The Queen's veil will become the seal, but the magic will demand a price, a truth. It will pull from you the deepest secret your soul holds and make it manifest. As the moon began its slow crawl across the face of the sun, plunging the valley into an eerie, premature night, Cashen and Ilara stepped onto the obsidian. The runes flared to life, painting them in cold, blue light. The ritual was wordless. It was feeling. Lyra poured the blood onto the stone at their feet, and the ground drank it hungrily. The bond between them, usually a warm, private thread, exploded outward. It became a web of light, visible to everyone present, connecting them to each other, then to the dais, then shooting out like spectral roots to touch the surrounding peaks. A collective gasp echoed. They were seeing the metaphysical architecture of the territories for the first time, and they saw the cracks, dark veins pulsing like infections. The eclipse reached totality. Darkness fell, absolute and profound. In that darkness, the magic spoke. It pulled. For Cashen, the truth ripped forth was a memory he had buried. The day he became king, not through glorious battle, but by finding his predecessor, a father figure murdered by a trusted advisor. The grief and rage he had locked away to appear strong surged up, and for a moment the spectral web flickered with red, the color of his buried vengeance. The magic demanded he acknowledge it, not to weaken him, but to integrate it. His strength was not in spite of his pain, but because of it. He let it flow, and the red blended into the gold of the web, strengthening it. For Ilara, the pull was different. The magic did not seek a hidden memory. It sought her core, the truth of the veil. She felt her very essence unraveling, not to expose a secret, but to reveal a function. A blinding light erupted from her, and in its glare, every wolf present saw her not as a void, but as a brilliant, complex constellation of silent frequencies. They saw her, truly saw her, and in that seeing they understood. Her scentlessness was not an error, it was a filter. She perceived the world not through scent, but through the underlying codes of magic and connection, the very codes that maintain the wards. Her brain didn't ignore pheromones, it translated them into a higher language. She was not a broken omega. She was a natural-born regulator, a living keystone. The secret her soul held was her purpose. As this revelation cemented, the web of light stabilized. The dark, pulsing cracks in the territorial wards began to knit themselves shut, weaving with threads of Ilara's unique, silent frequency. The pressure valve was not just sealed, it was recalibrated. The whispering winds fell silent. The eerie lights retreated to the heavens. A normal, quiet night descended. The eclipse passed. The moon moved on, and sunlight returned to the valley. The obsidian dais was dark and inert. Cashen and Ilara stood hand in hand, unchanged, and yet fundamentally transformed. The bond between them was now part of the landscape, a permanent, humming note in the symphony of the world. The return journey was a procession of a different kind. Word had already spread via pack telepathy. They were met not as survivors, but as sovereigns. Wolves from all the territories lined the paths back to the Grand Lodge, not just in submission, but in awe. They bowed as Ilara passed, not because she was the king's mate, but because they had felt her power in the mending of the world. She was no longer invisible, she was indelible. The council reconvened, but its purpose had shifted. With Kale's faction dismantled and the wards secure, the focus turned to rebuilding and integration. Cashen, with Ilara at his side, proposed a new charter, the Vale Accord. Territories would retain autonomy, but a new role was formalized. The Royal Shadow, a position Elara defined not as a spy, but as an auditor of magical and systemic stability, a check and balance for the throne itself. Her first official act was to pardon the lower-ranked members of Kale's pack who had been coerced, offering them integration and amnesty. Mercy, she demonstrated, could be the strongest signal of power. The final surprising detail emerged weeks later in the quiet of their chambers at Obsidian Peak. Elara, working on the new Accord's digital framework, sneezed. Cashen, across the room, suddenly froze. His head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. A slow, wonderstruck smile spread across his face. Elara. What? I can smell you. She stared at him. That's impossible. But it was true. The consecration had not given her a scent for the world. It had tuned her unique frequency to a key only his soul could perceive. To him, she now carried a fragrance, the crisp, clean scent of ozone after a storm, and the deep, comforting note of old books and grounded ink. It was the smell of clarity and hidden knowledge. It was hers for him alone. The girl born without a scent was now, to the one person who mattered, the most fragrant thing in the world. The paradox was complete. The tracker had found his invisible mate not by chasing a scent, but by becoming the one being capable of hearing her silence. In the end, the bond did more than unite two souls. It repaired a fracture in reality itself. Elara's lifelong curse was revealed as a sacred function. Cashen's maddening search was the universe aligning its most precise instrument with its most subtle key. From the depths of political treachery and magical decay, they forged a new stability, proving that true power isn't about being seen by everyone, but about being understood by the one who truly looks. The story closes not with a battle, but with a quiet moment of belonging. The invisible girl was seen, the mad king was sane, and the world, for the first time in centuries, was whole. Their reign was just beginning, built on a foundation no one else could have laid. So what does the story of the scentless Omega and the Alpha King leave us with? It's more than a paranormal romance. It's a blueprint for how the things that make us feel invisible in our own worlds might actually be our greatest strengths. Elara's journey from a forgotten ghost to the keystone of reality shows us that being overlooked isn't a sentence. It's often just a sign that you're operating on a different frequency. A frequency the right person or the right moment will be uniquely tuned to hear. The fated mates trope, as our research showed, works because it taps into a deep biological yearning for a connection that feels destined. But this story flipped the script. It asked, what if that destiny wasn't loud and obvious? What if it was silent, requiring not just recognition, but a fundamental expansion of perception to even be detected? Cashen didn't find his mate by following a scent. He had to learn to trust a feeling in a world that screamed he was insane. He had to become the one instrument precise enough to measure her absence. This narrative plays with a powerful, lingering question that extends beyond the page or screen. How many people in our lives are we walking past because we're only listening for the loudest signals? How many quiet strengths, how many essential pieces of the puzzle do we dismiss because they don't announce themselves in the way we expect? The tale of the Vale reminds us that the most critical systems, whether in a kingdom or a community, often depend on the silent regulators, the unseen connectors, the people who work in the background holding everything together. Elara and Cashen's bond, consecrated at the eclipse, didn't just save their world. It redefined what power looks like. True authority isn't about being the loudest or the strongest scent in the room. It's about being the perfect match, the stabilizer to the force, the code to the cipher. It proves that a queen isn't made by a crown, but by her capacity to see and mend the fractures others ignore. From a trope-defying romance to a lesson in perception, their story shows that the most profound connections often begin where conventional senses fail. If this journey from invisible outcast to indispensable queen captivated you, do us a huge favor. Smash that like button to let us know these deep dives into fictional worlds matter to you. Share this with a friend who loves a twist on destiny. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. We're just getting started, and there are countless more stories to unravel, more tropes to dissect, and more hidden strengths to uncover. Let us know in the comments below, what would your hidden strength be in a world ruled by scent? Would you be a roaring flame or a silent, binding force? We read every single one. Until next time, keep looking beyond the obvious. The most important truths are often the ones we have to learn to see.